Now, Akunabaz Ezekiel has been caught up with something else, but he has one of his team here, Lesia, who may be able to speak on behalf of the Secretariat, if we can make that happen logistically ever. Lesia de Oliveira.
Yes, coming up.
So we'll just hear quickly from Lesia, because I'm conscious of time, and then we'll get into the substance of the workshop, and I'll hand over to Wayne Crosby and Bruce Bradfield.
Boa tarde a todos e todas. Saudações em nome da Secretaria de Educação. A educação profissional ela é uma política pública, né, muito levada a sério por nós. E dentro dessa política nós temos várias ofertas de cursos técnicos e várias formas de oferta. Dentre os cursos que estão atrelados, né, a esse workshop, nós temos o curso de guia de turismo e hospedagem, técnica e hospedagem. Nesses dois cursos, nós temos mais de 1.400 alunos matriculados atualmente, abriremos mais vagas agora para o ano de 2021. Temos também o curso de gastronomia, né? Até o ano passado ele era chamado de curso de cozinha, mas o catálogo já fez alteração, agora é curso de gastronomia. É um curso que também é muito procurado, nós temos mais de 700 alunos matriculados atualmente. O curso técnico, cursos voltados para a área de produção de alimentos também é um forte, né? A Bahia, como grande produtora de queijos, de enlatados, né? de produtos derivados da carne, enfim. Aí nós temos o curso de alimentos, de agroindústria. Esses cursos têm mais de 800 alunos inscritos. Então, são cursos que possibilitam a esse estudante da nossa rede estadual se profissionalizar, né, conseguir um lugar no mundo do trabalho, se posicionar, ter sua aprendizagem, e isso é muito importante para a gente. O professor Robson quer complementar, quer falar algo?
Esses cursos, hoje, eles têm também uma forte articulação com os cursos de serviço, né, no pós-médio. Né? O que significa o pós-médio? O aluno conclui o ensino médio e ele passa mais um ano na escola com cursos que vão lhe dirigir ao mercado, um pequeno aperfeiçoamento para que ele possa estar no mercado de trabalho e, para além disso, os cursos vinculados à agricultura, isso estreita essa relação. Então, o desenvolvimento das trilhas, a visita às trilhas da uva lá no norte. Então, essa forte ligação dos cursos de formação, da gastronomia, do turismo, com o setor também agrícola, com o setor que agrega a produção agrícola para esse atendimento da rede hoteleira, até mesmo das escolas, e aí o pequeno agricultor tem uma relevância muito, muito grande nesse sentido. Então, o nosso sistema educacional são 3 anos de ensino médio, a educação profissional, até o ano passado, ela tinha 4 anos de formação técnica. Então, com a reformulação dos currículos, nós passamos a ter essa formação em 3 anos, e agora, com essa perspectiva do itinerário contínuo do cacau e chocolate, né? E aí, a partir daí, com outras experiências, com outros setores nesse itinerário contínuo que nós estamos vislumbrando. Esse é o grande desafio, principalmente no ano de pandemia, é identificar essas dificuldades e construir caminhos através dessas parcerias, para a gente construir um novo olhar, uma nova perspectiva para esse setor. Esse, na verdade, é o grande desafio, é formar esses indivíduos de forma unilateral, ou seja, ele está envolvido e antenado com o seu território de identidade, né? A sua terra, isso é fundamental. Então, são grandes desafios essa construção de um currículo que atenda à formação integral dos sujeitos, à formação técnica e essa vinculação com o mundo do trabalho, né? Que ele leva essa formação ao unilateral,
I
e a
think
partir
this is
daí...
a very good point. This is a very good point, Hobson, and maybe a really good point to hand over to our colleagues from the William Anglis Institute to talk exactly some strategies that we've been talking about with you to this point.
Perfeito, perfeito.
Thank you very much, Hobson and Ligia. I'd now like to invite Bruce Bradfield and Wayne Crosby from the William Anglis Institute of PACE to address the workshop. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. Yep. Okay. Just before Bruce and I start our discussion about our experience with developing competency-based training systems, I just wanted to reflect on some comments that Rosemma and Ligia had mentioned, and just to let you know that the comments that you've made about Bahia and the situation you're in at the moment is similar to everywhere that we operate, and that is all over Australia and in other countries in Southeast Asia. Everywhere the tourism industry has been very badly hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, and different countries are at different stages of recovery. And I'd just like to say that in Australia, we've been fairly fortunate in that we're a big country, but a big island. So we're not connected to other countries, and we've been able to manage the pandemic very well. And thankfully, we are out of lockdowns. And a couple of comments that you made, we are social beings. We want personal connection and interaction. And one of the best ways to do that is through the tourism industry, whether that is, accommodation, hospitality, events, meetings. There are just so many ways that the industry can help countries rebound. But our experience is that our industry in Australia is rebounding strongly. And the biggest challenge of industry now is to once again find skilled staff, skilled professionals to be able to deliver the standards of service that the industry is looking for, because that is what customers are demanding. And the only other thing I'll say is that, Rosemma, you mentioned getting out of your comfort zone. We had to get out of our comfort zone. We deliver programs not only in Melbourne, where our head office is, but all over Australia and all over Southeast Asia and all over China. And we used to do all that delivery face-to-face. And in the last year, all that delivery has been online and remote. And we have had to change the way we do absolutely everything so that we could continue to offer quality education and training for people wanting to enter the industry. So your challenge is universal. We're probably fortunate in one way that we're a little bit further on the journey because we've been able to open up our industry earlier than a lot of other countries. And I think there are learnings to be had from that. And the words that you've mentioned about cooperation and partnership, I think are really important, because if we all try and do it ourselves, we'll get nowhere. But if we can work cooperatively with like-minded people, we'll get somewhere and we'll get to that destination much faster. So I think there was a lot of relevance in the comments that you had both made. Just in terms of William Angliss Institute, and I won't spend too much time on this because we have met many of you before and you are familiar with us, but just to refresh your memory a little bit, and I'm sure we'll get a screen sharing exercise in a moment, but quickly, William Angliss Institute, we were established in 1940, so we've been operating for more than 80 years now. We are a specialist centre for foods, tourism, hospitality and events. Our head office is in Melbourne in Australia, but we have a campus in Sydney in Australia. We have offices and operations all over the states and territories of Australia. We have a campus in Singapore. We have a campus in Sri Lanka. We have 5 campuses in China, and we have campuses in Vietnam and Thailand. In terms of metrics, we have about 22,000 enrolments from students in our courses each year, and more than 4,000 of those are international students studying our programs both in Australia and in our overseas locations. And we have more than 400 specialist staff who help deliver those particular programs. We're a very unique organisation in that we deliver vocational and higher education programs for one industry sector only, that's foods, tourism, hospitality and events. And we offer a full range of qualifications from low-level certificates. Bruce, we're not getting the screen sharing.
It's showing screen sharing here, but I will try again. One moment.
All I'm seeing is your desktop, not the presentation.
I beg your pardon.
If you're having trouble, you want me to do it?
I'm having a bit of trouble here. One moment, please.
Bruce, you have several options on how which
Yes,
screen.
I realize I'm just having a bit of trouble finding it's showing that it's sharing. It's my problem.
The desktop, so you are sharing.
Yes, it's sharing now, but it's not showing the right screen. One moment, I'll just get out of this one.
Yes.
Maybe if I ask Matt, can you please share for me just for the moment, please?
I'm happy to do it if you like.
Yeah, thank you. Just having some trouble there.
Okay, if we go to the next slide, Matt, that's sort of where I am. It's just mentioning we offer a full range of qualifications from short courses right through to master's degrees. So it gives people the opportunity of starting in a secondary high school and developing their qualifications through to vocational qualifications and higher education master's programs. But why we're talking with you today is that we certainly offer a lot of training and consulting services for industry, for education providers and for governments. And our areas of specialisation are there. It's all components of the tourism and hospitality space, but I won't go through any of that. And also, if you go to the next slide, some of our clients, you can see here that our clients are all the major industry, hotel groups, airlines, integrated resorts, but also governments and regional governments, which is really why we're here with you today. And what I wanted to do was share with you some examples of the work that we've done previously, and that work started developing our competency standard systems in Australia. And we began our movement into competency-based training in the mid-1980s. So it is almost 40 years ago that we began developing our competency-based training system. And I can still remember as being a very young person involved in that program. And and I was a representative from the state of Victoria to develop a national system. And I came back to my institution and communicated to everybody that we needed to change the way we developed our courses, that no longer would we be developing our courses in isolation, nor would the government be developing the courses that we delivered. The courses would be led by industry, and we needed to listen to industry so that our courses were relevant and ensured that our graduates had the skills and the knowledge that industry was looking for. Once we had done that successfully in Australia, we then started to work with our close neighbours in the Southeast Asian region, and particularly the region of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So we've worked with those 10 countries in developing their competency-based training systems. And we've also done that in the Middle East, particularly with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but also in Bahrain. And all of the systems are really following the same methodologies. And those methodologies are all about developing industry competency standards. And those standards are developed in partnership with industry, but importantly led by industry, but supported strongly by government and education stakeholders. So it has been a partnership to be able to get industry relevant vocational training systems in operation. And we'll talk a little bit about the detail of developing competency standards a little later. But those competency standards are the cornerstone of all of the qualifications. Those standards are packaged into courses. So you group the competency standards together, excuse me, for particular job roles. So you would look at a job role of, say, a chef. And if you need to be a chef at this level, the skills and the knowledge you need to be able to do your job competently are identified, and those skills and knowledge are then packaged into courses. Those courses then form part of a qualifications framework, and then there's a skills recognition system that is strongly connected to industry. And that skills recognition system allows people who have had no formal training or do not have any qualifications to be assessed against the competency standards. And if they are proving to be competent in those skills, they are able to gain the certification that is the same as if they undertook training in an education institution. So once again, it's all based on competency standards. It enables us to produce resources, both human and physical and paper-based and digital, that are industry relevant, so that our graduates have the skills and knowledge that industry is looking for. As part of that framework that we've developed, it is also necessary to develop appropriate training and assessor capability for people who are training and assessing people either in education institutions or in industry. So that's really the basis of the system that we would suggest that Bahia consider, because what it will do is it will allow Bahia to lead the development of the tourism industry again when it is post-COVID. And it's really going to be important post-COVID to ensure that qualified staff are available to support industry, and those qualified staff have the skills and knowledge and attitude that industry requires. If I go to the next slide, Matt, it's really identifying a case study that we've worked on with 10 countries individually, but also collectively as part of the region of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Those countries are listed there for you. Just quickly, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Brunei, and Myanmar. Those countries, although sometimes cooperating and partnering, also sometimes compete. But what they want to do is to develop ASEAN as an economic region so that people come to the region and not just one country. And what it will allow, it allows growth in investment, it allows growth in tourism, and it allows growth in employment. The process that we undertook with those 10 countries was an amazing journey to go on, because each of those countries had very different vocational training systems, very different standards of service, but as a region, they wanted to have consistency so that if somebody went to Singapore, they would get a similar standard of product and service as if that same person went to Cambodia or Laos or Brunei or Myanmar. So the idea was to have consistency of product and service standards. The way that we worked with each of those countries was to develop some common competency standards that each country supported. And the competency standards were developed for 32 job profiles, so that the 32 jobs were identified and the skills and the knowledge and attitude required for each of those job titles was discussed, debated, and agreed. And we can share all of that work with you. But what we would be suggesting is that it would need to be customised and adapted to suit the requirements that Bahia has for its industry. Although fundamentally the same, there will be some differences. So the cornerstone were the competency standards developed by the stakeholders, by a cooperation between and led by industry, supported strongly by government, and supported strongly by education and training providers. That process took quite a while. It took more than a year to develop those competency standards working with all of those stakeholders. Then we packaged those competency standards into a qualifications framework, producing various courses at particular levels. So a course for a commie chef would be different to an executive chef, because there were different skills and knowledge that the different job roles had at particular levels of industry. We then produced 242 different toolboxes, which are resource kits that allow the training and assessment of each of those competency standards in the labour divisions of industry that we're talking about there. So in housekeeping, front office, food production, food and beverage service, travel agencies, and tour operation. So that was a 10-year journey that we went on with those 10 countries. Now, if we go to the next slide, that work continued because there were gaps existing in each country. Whether those gaps were enough skilled trainers and educators to be able to train the professionals in the labour divisions that we were talking about, whether there wasn't enough infrastructure either from industry or government to move the industry forward, and if there weren't enough skilled educators to be able to ensure that all the training was developed effectively. So we continued working with them. We developed specific training and assessment programs for the tourism and hospitality industry to enable educators to use the resources, to use the competency standards, to deliver effective training so that industry would get trained, skilled professionals to come and support the growth of industry. And the biggest weakness that all of those 10 countries and Australia had in the early days was that a lot of the graduates coming out of the education system in all of those countries did not have the skills that industry required. So it was difficult for those people to gain employment because they didn't have the skills. And if they did gain employment, industry were disappointed with the skill level that they had, and they had to retrain them on the job again. And customers were disappointed because they weren't getting the standard of service levels that they were looking for. So some very common problems and some very common solutions. And the solutions are all based around ensuring that courses are designed by industry leading the design process, but working closely with government and education to make sure that the training programs are relevant for industry and graduates have the skills and the knowledge to do the work to the required standard. So that was almost a 15-year history of working with those 10 countries to develop the systems that now they are all implementing. So there's a lot of learning that occurred there. And what we'll see later is that the potential is to really fast track that process significantly, because we have all of the work is done. All of the physical resources that some are now digitalized are all there. So from the state of Bahia's situation is all that information is available. It simply needs to be contextualized and adjusted to suit the circumstances existing in the state of Bahia. But the good thing about our industry is that it doesn't really matter if you're checking into a hotel in Melbourne or in Singapore or in Rio or in any of the tourist regions of Bahia. The skills are fundamentally the same. So the industry competency standards can be used as a basis for all of that course and qualification framework development. Now, I'm sorry, as always, I talk too much and for too long. So I'm happy to stop there. And if there are any questions that anyone might have, we can maybe try and answer those before Bruce moves on to the next stage of the presentation. If there are no questions at the moment, that's fine. We'll just keep going.
Great, thank you, Wayne. Look, firstly, I'd like to say hello to my dear friends in Bahia. Particularly, thank you to Hobson. Good to see you again. And to Christina, to Louisa, Matthew and the team, thank you. Ligia, thank you so much for your welcome from the Secretariat. And also to Josema, I think your presentation will probably flow a lot into what I am going to be introducing now. I'm going to take a bit of a step back, I guess, and to acknowledge the challenges that we face in developing a TVET system for hospitality and tourism. And also, I guess you cannot ignore the reality of what is happening globally at the moment, and particularly in Bahia, where tourism and hospitality is so important. As Wayne said, we are facing the same challenges in Australia. We have faced them. We've undergone many, many months of hard lockdown, but now we have come out of that, and one of the first priorities for government has been to get the tourism and hospitality industry back on board. We understand how important it is. One initiative that's starting in the next few weeks is that our government is actually making our airfares half price to travel within Australia. So to encourage locals to travel and enjoy tourism and hospitality when they cannot travel overseas. So we know it's important, and I think we all acknowledge tourism and hospitality is important because of what you have mentioned earlier, Josema. It is about the humanity. It's about socio-economic issues and challenges, we acknowledge that really people is going to be the basis of the recovery. We need to keep the economy going, but we need to keep people inspired and included and engaged. Hospitality, it's interesting that that's a really great avenue for people to see, to actually get back into employment. As Hobson has talked about many times, the importance of local, I guess we call it paddock to plate or agriculture to tourism pathway is also acknowledged as being an important basis for the tourism industry, particularly in Bahia. The entire industry relies on people, and that is why we're in training. We're training people. We're not building machines. We're training people and developing skills. The importance of the industry economically to the society, but also to the government, cannot be ignored. And as Wayne said, just employing people is not enough. They need to be skilled. The industry needs skilled people. That means that the quality of the products is maintained and it attracts more business and more money. Wayne also talked about the example in ASEAN. One of the aims of that project was to encourage mobility of the workforce. And Bahia and Brazil being such a huge country, everything we do is actually providing people with the opportunity to become mobile in their employment and also give them an opportunity to, I guess, chase the money in a better future. But there are challenges, and we've talked about the challenges many times. In previous discussions, I guess we've agreed on many of the challenges, but before we go to the next stages of a solution, I'd just like to go over those challenges again. I guess there is no particular order in these challenges. I've just sort of mentioned them one by one, but there is no priority in these challenges. But not having minimum standards in industry is something that is a challenge. By having minimum standards and an agreed minimum standard and an understood minimum standard, this also is a challenge. The training that we are now providing, that they may not be what industry needs. And when we talk about industry, we're talking about different sectors. There may be gaps, there might be areas where it's serviced very well by particular providers, but is there consistency? The mutual recognition of skills, what we mean by that is we do have a lot of people in the workforce we know that are not trained, but they are skilled. If we have a system of qualifications and recognised skills and a framework for recognising people's skills, this means that people can then become, as we do in Australia, we call it a recognition of their prior learning, which is not about qualifications, it's not about training, it's about their skills. It does encourage them to move into the education and training sector to upskill and to move into higher sectors of the industry. That pathway of skills and the recognition of their skills and career progression is important for keeping the employees engaged, but also giving employers some surety around what their business development plan may look like. This is increasingly important now when we're looking at moving on after the pandemic. Stakeholder engagement. At the moment, I think one of the challenges that you are probably facing, as we have faced in Australia, is getting the stakeholders identified and having representation when training is developed and when we are talking about the situations that we have here today. That's why it's great to have Josema here and also some of you who may be attending today from industry. That tripartite cooperation between government, education providers and industry is critical to actually coming up with a solution to these challenges. The other challenges that we do face in Australia, and we have faced also in other projects that we have undertaken, and I suggest possibly in Bahia, is the engagement of industry in the design of the programs that are being delivered. And that is across all programs. So what happens in Australia is that is not a static thing. It is not in the original design. It is also in the ongoing monitoring and potentially the contextualization and the upgrading of qualifications as we go on. I know that Hobson has talked before about the importance of entrepreneurship and business development in programs that we deliver to people that are working in perhaps ground roots industries, tourism or food or hospitality industries. I think that the inclusion of this has been a recent development in Australian qualifications, and now that's something that is being recognised globally. For example, we have a diploma of hospitality in Australia, and in that diploma, there's actually units around actually establishing business contacts and how to engage with business. So it's about business consultation, and you would not expect to see that in a hospitality qualification where you're being learned about customer service, food and beverage, perhaps how to make a bed, but how to engage with business and how to conduct business negotiations is perhaps a little bit surprising, but what business is actually asking for. The other one is about it's very much a school-based system. In Australia, the system can be not just school-based, but work-based. So industry can actually be involved in the training rather than being sitting off as a recipient of successful graduates. So all of these challenges, if you do not have those qualities in your training system, then it is a challenge in terms of being able to deliver the outcomes of skilled up graduates that are going to be coming out and actually increasing the productivity and the effectiveness of the industry. So I'm going to leave it at there because I'm also aware of the time, and we've got to get onto this framework of how we might be able to address the challenges. Back to you, Wayne.
Thanks, Bruce. We've spoken a lot today about competency standards, and competency standards are it's everyday language to us from William Angliss, whether we're talking about our work in Australia or in the range of other countries that we operate in. And I know Brazil and Bahia is considering moving down the competency standard path. And I think that's a wise choice to consider, because it will provide your courses with industry relevant content and ensure the graduates of those courses are ready to take up the wonderful roles that industry has for them to move into employment. What I want to talk about for the next few minutes is what are competency standards, how do we develop them, and what use can they be put to? So in the starting point, we don't need to start from scratch. The first thing we would do is examine what regulations there are in Bahia at the moment. So we would look to the government to be able to identify what those regulations, and also go to industry to see what the industry standards are. And often the industry standards required and the regulations that government have in place are not working together. So we need to do a bit of an analysis of that and ensure that there is some cohesion between what industry is looking for and what regulations exist. The next step would be to review the job descriptions and specifications of the roles in industry that employers are looking for. So once again, we don't need to start from the beginning. We already have the job roles identified. We already have the skills and knowledge required, but we would want to test that in the industry in Bahia to make sure that those job descriptions and specifications are relevant. There are a range of courses in your catalogue of courses at the moment. It would be useful to look and review those courses to see whether they are industry relevant, to ensure that they do incorporate the standards that industry is looking for from graduates when they move into the workplace. And sometimes specific organisations will have particular needs that they will want incorporated into competency standards. And the standards are flexible so that they can be adapted to suit the needs of not only countries, but organisations within those countries. But I think the most important ingredient of developing these competency standards is that all of the relevant stakeholders get together and are listened to, they are heard, and they have an input into the standards that are developed. I mentioned my experience at William Angliss in Australia. And I don't want to tell you how old I am, but it was almost 40 years ago that I began working with competency standards for the industry in Australia. That's not the only reason my hair is white. There are other reasons for that. But it was a real problem trying to convince, first of all, my institute, William Angliss, and other training providers that they needed to review and change the way courses were developed and delivered. And the reason for that was industry was saying very loudly and very clearly, your graduates are not ready for the work that I need them to do. So your courses need to change so that the training that's provided ensures that the graduates have the skills that industry require. The next slide starts to talk about stakeholder engagement. And what do we mean by that? And how does it happen? And why is it important? I'm using a very basic description of what stakeholders are. But for me, in the education space, stakeholders are really about industry, government, and educators working together to make sure that training programs are reflective of the standards industry wants. And I've got to say, in every country that we've worked in, that's been the most difficult part of the process, is that industry will say, oh, the education system doesn't know what we want. The educators will say, industry won't help us and won't employ our graduates. And the government sits there in the middle sometimes shaking its head saying, we try to fund the development of our people, we develop training programs, but we're not quite matching the needs of industry. So the only way to solve that problem is for the three groups to get together and work cooperatively. And it really produces some very, very positive results. I don't know enough about the system in Brazil or in Bahia at the moment, but I know traditionally in most countries, courses and training programs have been designed by educators and or governments, and quite often without the industry input that's required, because a lot of the educators and a lot of the government people have not had the industry experience themselves. So it's quite difficult sometimes to get courses that are relevant if you don't have the right stakeholder engagement, and particularly from industry who know what graduate skills they require. And like a very simple example, if you want to develop courses for gastronomy, cookery, culinary, as I heard people talking about at the beginning of today. The best way to get the right courses designed is to include the experts from industry who have those skills and know the skills that the graduates need. So they need to be heavily involved in the design of the course. Now, chefs may not know how to design the courses, but they will know the content and the competency standards that need to be in those courses. And if that partnership and engagement can take place, then the course will be relevant to industry. The participants in the course and the graduates from the course, when they leave, will have the skills and knowledge that industry require. This week at William Angliss, we've been having some graduation programs. So hundreds and hundreds of people have graduated from courses that they completed last year in really difficult circumstances, because a lot of those courses were delivered remotely by technology. But the biggest plus for all of those graduates is that the industry is now desperate to get skilled people back into the workplace to help grow the industry again. So there's a fantastic opportunity. It's terrible to say that the last year has caused everybody some hardship, caused a lot of grief. But what it's now done, it's providing opportunities for business and for people to be employed in those businesses to help the re-engagement of people into the social activities, the experiences that they want to have in the tourism and hospitality space. The industry really has a responsibility to assist people get back to what is going to be their new normal life, and to help people have careers and opportunity for development into the future. Just a bit of a suggestion for Bahia to consider. If you're looking at, what I'm hearing and reading is that you are looking at developing new vocational training systems. I would strongly suggest that you consider a model that is based around stakeholder engagement. So it's a bit of a plea for government not to try and do it itself. It's a plea for educators not to try and do it themselves. But it is a strong recommendation for government, educators and industry to get together and work out what the right answers are. And the starting point would be to review the catalogue of courses that you've got in your TVET system at the moment, and to compare how they relate to the job roles that industry require. So I'm sure Rosemma and her department has identified skill shortages in particular sectors of industry. And if we open up our hotels, we're going to need people working in housekeeping of certain numbers. We're going to need people who are food and beverage attendants. We're going to need people to make wonderful drinks that we consume, fantastic food that we want to eat. So there's going to be lots of shortages of skilled people to undertake those jobs. So what we've got to do is to make sure that our courses have all the skills and knowledge that industry needs, so that our graduates get great jobs, they provide fantastic service, customers have a wonderful experience, they want to have more of that, so there's repeat business and repeat custom. The industry grows, more people need to be employed, training programs need to be delivered, so the wheels are turning and they're all heading in the right direction. But it's that stakeholder engagement that provides the solution. Then it's a matter of developing the competency standards for each of the job roles. So a lot of the courses that we offered in Australia and that were offered in the countries of ASEAN that we've been working in, and the country and in China where we're working heavily, is that most of the courses were general. So they were giving students general skills, but they weren't giving them specific skills for specific jobs. So if you want a job and a career in front office, they're the competencies that you need to have in the course that you do. You might not need competencies in other areas of the industry to begin with. But if you're in front office and you gain the skills and you gain employment, if you wanted to move into food and beverage, you need a new skill set. So you would go and get the competencies required to do those jobs. And it's always important to keep testing to see whether the competency standards are still relevant, because our industry changes. Our post-COVID industry will be different from our pre-COVID industry, because we will have to do things in different ways and people will have different expectations. If that's the case, we need to change our courses so that our graduates have those skills so they can produce the right answers in industry, and we have wonderful, wonderful experiences that our customers love. So they keep enjoying those experiences and keep coming back and growing the industry even further. So it's a real post-COVID opportunity of making sure our courses are industry relevant, that their competency standards in them are relevant for industry, and they are giving our graduates the skills and the knowledge and attitude needed for jobs. Maybe just quickly, we've spoken a lot about these words. What's a competency? What is it? What does it mean? Very simply, it refers to the ability to perform particular tasks and duties to the standard of performance expected where the person is working. And a competency includes skills, it includes knowledge, and it includes attitude. People often say, how do you train people for attitude? In customer service, in the service sector, it is so important. Having the skills and the knowledge is not enough. It's also the attitude, it's the passion, it's the smile, it's the wanting to provide extra for the benefit of the customer. So that's very simply what a competency is. Now, the dimensions of a competency standard, it can be all about tasks. They can be simple skills needed to do a job, but they can also be management skills, so that employers need to be managed. Managers need to manage. There are different skills managing a group of people in the workplace than exist in just doing the operational job. And one of the biggest skills to have is responding to contingencies. One of the biggest challenges in Asia was people, because of their culture, were very, very shy to ask questions and respond and make decisions if it wasn't in their list of duties. And the way Asia would sometimes deal with problems in the service sector was simply to have more people. But the answer is not to have more people, it's to have more skilled people. So the competencies can be all about managing contingencies, decision-making, taking initiative. So it's not just the operational skill of performing a task. And a real competency is being able to transfer the skills in various situations. So just finally on competencies, to be competent, if you're a competent, skilled employee, you must be able to demonstrate that you can perform at the acceptable skill levels, to organise the required tasks that need to be undertaken, to respond and react appropriately when things go wrong, which happens all the time. So it is a skill to be able to respond to a difficult situation and to be able to fill a workplace role or to transfer skills and knowledge to new situations. So that's what competency is all about. And a competency standard is a document that will allow people to deliver effective training, but also effective assessment and valid assessment. So a competency standard will contain all of these particular components. It will indicate the hours that a course should be undertaken for. It will indicate the particular elements of the competency standard and how that standard needs to be performed in industry. It identifies it. So it's not about making a coffee. It's about making a coffee 5 times in 2 minutes in a coffee shop environment to the satisfaction of the customers ordering it. So that's the difference between a competency standard and a skill. The skill is making the coffee, but the competency standards provides aspects of the development that can be measurable. So how many coffees do you need to make? What coffees do they need to be? They've got to be made to the satisfaction of the customer. So if a customer wants a slight change to their flat white, the person making that needs to have the ability to be able to do so. I've provided an example of what a competency standard looks like. It's too detailed to go through, but each of our competency standards that we develop have all of that previous information in them. So the title, the hours, the descriptor of what the competency is, the different elements of that competency standard, and the variables that identify the different activities that need to be undertaken. Like all this, obviously, we're going to provide for you to have a more detailed look at. But that's a little bit of information about stakeholder engagement, about what a competency standard is, about how to develop it, and about the uses that they can be put to. And in the next webinar that we have, we're going to unpack those competency standards. And we're going to go through the development of them to see how they're produced and put into action and how they operate in a course structure. Another opportunity for questions if anybody has any. I always worry when there are no questions, but that's good if you don't want to stop now. Bruce, do you want to move forward with this, or do you want me to keep going?
Look, if you like, I can take this one, then you can take the more detail after, if you like. How's that? Look, in terms of moving ahead with a framework for getting to the stage, you know, we're building on the competency stuff that Wayne's been talking about and building on what we have done in other countries and also in Australia. The importance of stakeholder groups and getting stakeholders involved has been mentioned several times. But what would they be doing? So I just want to step through the steps of that framework of engagement. And starting with, I guess, as Wayne mentioned, going through the catalogue of courses, looking at those courses and also looking at industry standards. So it's really quite a deep investigation of what is existing. The plan would then be to look at, I think, Hosama, you've mentioned that there is already job roles identified, looking at the competency standards that might sit against those job roles. All of that works together in that stakeholder group model to develop a qualifications framework. So it's putting competencies together. We'll talk about this in a lot more detail later, putting the competencies together into qualifications. the idea would then to have a common curriculum. And what we mean by that is the resources developed would be common across the qualifications. But I guess some people get scared by when we talk about common. The qualifications and competency system is also able to be contextualized. And that's an important thing to consider with certainly with a large country and a large state and with different demands in different areas and regions. A skills recognition system, as I mentioned earlier, and Wayne has mentioned, it's important to have a system developed that also recognises experienced workers who may not have a qualification. So a system for recognising their skills and granting them qualifications. It incentivises employees if that's available, and also provides them the opportunity to move up the ladder in the organisation or the industry they're working in. Very much at the basis of all of this, at the end of all of this, is to prepare the training system for the delivery and implementation of the system. So as Wayne had mentioned, for ASEAN, we have moved through to not just providing teacher training, but by giving those countries the ability to become self-sufficient in training. So we develop master trainers who can develop the trainers in country, and also regional trainers. So the idea is that training and assessment of the teachers is going to be critical to the implementation. We always suggest and strongly suggest is that we work on pilots. So a stakeholder group initially may be focusing on a particular area, a particular industry, potentially even potential job, example job roles. So we don't tackle everything at once. It's very much looking at a particular example and moving ahead. So I think, Wayne, you're going to talk a bit more detail on the next slide about what we might do for Bahia. And you're on mute, Wayne.
How many times have I heard you're on mute, Wayne? I'm not sure. If we go back to that slide 18, thanks, Matt. The only comment I'd make about the proposed stages of the framework is that the stages, I would suggest we go in isolation. So we would review the existing courses and or standards, and then we would have a discussion with all of the stakeholders. And that discussion could be around, hey, these courses look fantastic. Those courses are very relevant. They have all of the required content in them. Graduates from those courses are going to get great jobs because they've got the skills and knowledge that industry is looking for. And those courses are at the required standard that industry wants. That's one discussion that could happen. Or the discussion could come up with a recommendation. You know, some of these courses are probably not providing the skills and the knowledge and attitude that industry is looking for. So maybe we need to change the course a little bit to make sure that it is up to the standard that industry wants. So there is a review process at that stage. Then if you decide to go down the competency standard approach, you develop the competency standards for each of the job roles. But before you go any further, there would be another review process then, so that the stakeholders get together, collectively review the competency standard, and the discussion could say, you know what, this competency standard has not got everything we need in it, so we need to add some more content or some more skills in it. Or the discussion could be, hey, these competency standards look absolutely correct for these job roles. So 10 of the job roles, we give them a big tick. Competency standard is perfect. But for some other job roles, and I noticed you had some 22 job roles earlier, Rosemma, when you were talking about the system, some of those job roles, the competency standards might need some upgrading. So then what you would do is you would package those standards into the qualifications framework, and you would review the framework once it's completed. So you'd get the stakeholders together again. So industry, government and educators would look at that framework and say, you know what, we've got all of the courses and at the right level in that framework. So we've got the right lower level courses, we've got the right, and those lower level courses could be at high schools. We've got the right middle level courses, which could be in your vocational training system. And we've got the right upper level courses that match the higher education system. Or when reviewing that framework, the decision or comment could be, we need to make some adjustments in any of those particular sections. When all of the curriculum and resources are developed, once again, you need a review process. So you ensure that you get it right and it's working. And we're talking about running some pilots down the bottom of that framework. We would always suggest you run a pilot to make sure your model is going to work. If the model works, then you can expand it and roll it out to other areas. Bruce has spoken about the skills recognition system and the importance of the trainer and assessor programs to be able to use the competency standards effectively and to be able to deliver effective training and assessment. The next slide, Matt. What we're really saying here is that there is a lot of work that needs to go into developing a new system and a new framework. What we're suggesting is we can probably help you fast track the solution that you might be looking to develop. And the reason we can help that fast tracking, do it much faster and much cheaper, is that because all of this work has already been done. Competency standards for the job roles are there. So firstly, you would look at the job roles and say, yep, those are the job roles we need, or perhaps we're missing some job roles, so you would add job roles in. You'd then look at the standards for each of the job roles and you'd say, yep, all the standards are the right ones, or we need to add a few more standards in there because there are some particular needs in the Bahia tourism industry that are not in that framework. So they're adjusted for the needs of industry or the culture of the different parts of Bahia state. I know there are different regions in Bahia that have different tourism products and different cultures. So you may have to adjust those standards and the qualifications to suit. Once again, we have got mountains of curriculum. We've got it in hard copy, we've got it in electronic copy. Once again, we're not suggesting just take this and use it. We are suggesting to look at it, review it, and if it meets your needs, then you can make adjustments to it. And there's a process to help you go through that. The training and assessment resources. I know when I started teaching 40 years ago, I had no training resources. That every day or every night before I taught the next day, I would madly go and try and develop the resources that I would use for my training program the next day. Now we're fortunate. We've got resources, we've got YouTube, we've got lots of ways that we can access information that we can skillfully put together into our training programs. The skills recognition system, I can't speak more or how important it is, because there are so many people in industry who don't have formal qualifications, but they have great experience, they have great expertise, they have great skills and knowledge. We need to be able to recognise that and certify it. And we've been very experienced in that review process of all of the different components that might make up a solution for Bahia to consider. Bruce, you might like to finish off here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Wayne. Look, I think as Wayne had just mentioned before, it's important to recognise that there is a staged approach that we're suggesting is most successful. And it's about consensus and agreement. So the stakeholder group, yes, we agree that we suggest strongly, I think that you agree, that education providers, government and industry are important to be in part of the consultation process. And agreement and endorsement happens at every stage. It's not something where we go off, work on something and come back at the end and do the endorsement at the end of the entire process. Setting up those stakeholder advisory groups is important to ensure that the correct stakeholders are involved, and we do have the relevant people to take into account the challenges that you do have, whether they are regional, whether they are specific industry associations and bodies, and so on, or maybe perhaps particular education providers who should be involved. Again, we talked about the stages. One of the most important stages is actually getting consensus and agreement around what those competency standards are, both in industry and what is developed for the education training provider. As Wayne mentioned, the piloting of a particular job role is important, or in a particular industry sector. By packaging the competency standards into the curriculum, courses and qualifications, this is a stage down the track after the initial stages of identifying what the competencies are. So it's a staged approach. The workshops that we do undertake are very much part of that staged approach. I wouldn't take a guess, Wayne, at how many workshops might have been conducted for the ASEAN project?
Hundreds.
Hundreds of workshops. So I think the importance
thousands of participants.
Okay, hundreds of workshops, thousands of participants. I think the other thing too is having a commitment to implement what is actually worked on. So I think that is the importance of the government engagement in those stakeholder groups, that there is an understanding throughout the process that government, industry and providers are on board. Next stage, okay, staged approach. Next slide, please, Matt. So what are the advantages of a staged approach? It does minimise risk. Every event, every workshop, every stakeholder engagement is a stage. At any of those stages, it's possible to actually say, well, that's great, we've come a really long way. We might just put a bit of a stop to it there and we'll pick it up later on, or not, or we keep going. So the risk involved is minimal by taking a staged approach. The investment is staged. Again, a great thing for government to consider and also for industry is that by taking a staged approach, the investment is also staged. Small steps and small stages also provide the opportunity for small wins, which is, as we know, I guess we also end up acting like children in some ways. It's good to have, every time you get a success, you feel like going ahead. So I think that the staged approach with successes gives the impetus and the energy to keep going. Reviewing and being able to stop at any time, as I mentioned, is very, very important. At each stage, I think, as Wayne mentioned, at every stage, there is a review and agreement part to that stage. We've suggested, again, a pilot, and then the idea would be, or the potential is, that it could be rolled out to the entire system. At the moment, we're using hospitality and tourism as an example. The pilot, of course, would be within that industry, but I think that the successes that we've had in hospitality and tourism TVET development internationally means that the model could potentially become a showcase for the system in terms of the way that it can actually achieve results, and they are visible and experienced results that that we all love to see. So I'm going to move on to you, Wayne, now. You might want to finish up with some closing remarks and maybe what we can move ahead with.
Yeah, sure. Look, I know, Christina, that there is a question. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct. It's a question on the Q&A from Agnaldo addressing your last slide, Wayne. What would be, you've presented the proposal, so what would be the deliverables for that, for the work with Bahia?
Okay, sorry, which slide are we talking about? Slide 18, is it?
Yep, on the model suggested for Bahia.
Right. Look, well, what we're saying there is that we have done lots of development of competency standards, courses, qualifications frameworks, all of the resources and curriculum, as well as the trainer and assessor program. So we have all that, and we have it in various forms. So what we're really almost offering is, if Bahia is interested in going down this pathway, that we can bring all that to the table and with you work out the solutions that are relevant for Bahia. So as I mentioned, it's all about taking the base and then customizing, contextualizing, adjusting for what's required by industry or even different regions in Bahia to ensure that the framework is relevant for industry and relevant for graduates to be able to undertake the course to get the skills they need for employment. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but what I'm saying is we have all this framework. The details, the components is there. We can bring that with us. We can work cooperatively and in partnership with you and use the work that we've done in various parts of the world so that you can fast track whatever adjustments and solutions you're looking for in a change system. I hope that is answering the question that was asked. Okay, look, finally, to finish off, it was once again useful for us to hear a little bit more about what's happening in the tourism sector and in education for tourism in Bahia. It helps us understand the situation that you are in at the moment and perhaps some of the challenges that you are facing, and provides an opportunity for us to think about that, discuss that with you to see if we can help, once again, fast track some of the solutions. What we were thinking, and just to give a bit of an example about the next workshop, is that we've spoken at a high level today about what occupational standards and competency standards are. What we wanted to do next time was to look at this in much more detail. So to look at a job role, look at the occupational standards associated with a particular job, then look at the competency standards that are relevant to that particular job, look at the detail in that competency standard so that you have a thorough understanding of what is comprised in a competency standard, and that would allow all of the different components of the framework then to be developed from that competency standard. So the standard's the starting point. The development of the rest of the framework starts and begins with that standard. We want to take the standard and move through the development of the components of the framework and work with you to see how that is done for a particular job role. And also we would be looking at the potential of looking to see what pathways there could be in either that job role or qualification for people to be able to move into and out of the system to gain the skills and knowledge that they need at particular times. So that's what we suggest we focus on for the next workshop. If that's what you think is a good idea, we just simply need to have that confirmed. Whether it's confirmed today or later is no problem for us. We just want to know from you, is that where you would like us to go with the next workshop that we have?
Acredito que sim, ele tem uma complementariedade das falas iniciais, e eu acho que está dentro do que nós já discutimos e planejamos.
Thank you for
Okay. Sorry, Wayne.
No, that's fine, Matt. Go.
So now we have some time for some questions or answers for any questions people may have, either about what has been presented. It's an opportunity to discuss whether you think the way forward seems good. We've just talked about the outline for workshop number 2, but do you have any doubts or any questions, any thoughts that anyone would like to add? Now is the time before we close. So I'll pause there and allow either use the put your hand up function on the bottom of the Zoom tool, or you can use the Q&A and we can read it out for you. Any of the panelists who have the ability to talk, please unmute yourself or share your video, and yes, feel free. Well, if there's no questions or doubts now at the moment, or nothing that people would like to add, that's fine. You're very welcome to send questions after this fact, or any thoughts that happen afterwards, through to Hobson or to myself or Christina or Louisa in my team, and we'll engage with our Australian friends and colleagues, Wayne and Bruce. So don't be shy. Although I think I've seen a question here. No, I think that's fine. Well, before we make our concluding remarks, maybe I would invite those who can turn on their video to do so, and we'll take a group photo or a family photo of all of us. So Eva, if you wouldn't mind doing that. And I should also have said we'll share photos and PowerPoint presentations with the participants. So we have your contact details from your registration. So we'll be sure to share all this with you. So thank you very much for sharing that. So put your videos back on, put on some smiles, fix your hair if you want. I always have to do that.
Is everybody ready?
Thank you, Matt, for that.
Welcome, Bruce.
I'll take a couple of them, and both screenshots and photos with my phone. So if you could just give me a moment, and one last photo, and we're all done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eva. So in In concluding, I might just make some remarks and I'll hand back to Hobson as well to conclude. So I just want to thank everybody today for your attention and time, particularly to our friends and colleagues in Bahia this evening. Thank you very much at the end of your working day for coming along to participate and to contribute to this workshop. We're really very pleased to be partnering with the government of Bahia and are very excited about the prospects of our collaboration and are looking forward to our further 2 workshops in this series. And as I said, we'll be sure to share all of the materials from today's workshop with all of you who participated. Please don't be shy to get in touch and to talk with us if you like. We're always here and very approachable. So I might hand to Hobson to make the concluding remarks on behalf of Bahia, but I'd also just, before I do that, thank Wayne and Bruce for your time, and Eva as well, early morning in Australia before your work day. It's wonderful to have you with us here in Brazil. Over to you, Hobson.
Thank you. Agradecer. Eu sei que aí é bem cedinho, né? Acho que é quase 5 ou 6 da manhã que nós começamos aí, enquanto nós estamos aqui na tardinha à noite. Não, muito obrigado. Eu acho que são perspectivas de construção e nós vamos nos debruçar sobre ela e agora ampliando esse escopo de pessoas envolvendo outros setores, aí com foco. Então, em nome do secretário da Educação do Estado da Bahia, professor Jerônimo Rodrigues, desejar que a gente tenha um sucesso nessa construção. Em nome também dos 2 superintendentes, o professor Ezequiel teve um problema técnico, ele não pôde entrar na sala, mas da educação profissional, e o professor Márcio Gomes, que estava na reunião com as universidades, chegou aí no finalzinho, mas vai estar com a gente na próxima reunião, que é dos projetos estratégicos da educação integral e tempo integral, que para a gente é muito cara, e principalmente nesse tocante do 5º itinerário no novo ensino médio, nós estamos trabalhando para que essa construção dessas competências passem a valer nos nossos cursos propedêuticos, na relação com a educação integral, né, e a educação profissional. Então, eu quero desejar um bom dia para vocês e uma boa noite a todos nós. Eu ainda vou entrar mais uma reunião aqui agora, até às 10 da noite. Então, gente, muito obrigado por essa interlocução, né, esses afazeres. Cristina, um grande abraço às nossas tradutoras, né, com muito empenho e afinco, né, traduzindo na essência as falas, né, e vamos construir, vamos botar em pauta aí, a partir da concepção, de construção desse projeto, das competências e habilidades dos cursos da Secretaria da Educação, em articulação tanto com os setores produtivos, com as secretarias afins, a CETUR, agradeço aí a presença da CETUR, Secretaria de Turismo, e os secretários municipais que acompanharam aqui com a gente todo esse processo, né? E a gente vai construindo essa pauta. Acho que devagarzinho nós estamos num momento difícil, nós estamos numa tentativa de volta às aulas remota, então essa semana foi muito intensa para a gente, cidades decretando calamidade pública por causa da Covid, então essa semana nos pegou aí também de sobressalto, né? Itabuna mesmo, onde tínhamos um grande número de pessoas, os secretários tiveram que dar atenção ao estado de calamidade. Então, graças a Deus, vocês têm um governo federal que atenderam as demandas, a gente nem tanto, mas os governos estaduais estão lutando, as federações estão lutando para que a gente supere, e aí só supera com força de trabalho e apresentando essa alternativa. Então, um bom dia a vocês, uma boa noite, e até o dia 23, não é isso, Cristina? No mesmo bate-canal, no mesmo horário, às 17 horas, algumas pessoas se passaram aí no horário, mas 17 horas rigorosamente em ponto. Uma boa noite a todos.
Maravilha. Boa noite. Boa noite.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening, good morning. See you on the 23rd of March.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Tchau, tchau.
Ciao.
Boa noite. Vou entrar na outra reunião aqui.
Bom dia, boa noite.